Good evening. Welcome to Kenya News Update today. I'm your host, and this is our 12-minute deep dive into a developing story that connects Nairobi to the Persian Gulf, touching on national security, economic stability, and the safety of Kenyan citizens abroad. The topic, Kenya Airways begins repatriation flights amid a widening Middle East crisis. The date is March 6, 2026. The situation is fluid, and the implications for Kenya are significant. We'll break it down from every angle. Our story begins with a simple announcement from Kenya's national carrier. On March 4th and 5th, 2026, Kenya Airways operated special flights between Nairobi and Dubai. These were not your typical commercial routes. They were designated repatriation flights, approved by Dubai International Airport, specifically for citizens of Kenya and the United Arab Emirates, as well as legal residents who found themselves stranded by the sudden escalation of conflict. The carrier was clear. This is an emergency measure, a lifeline for people caught on the wrong side of a war that now directly involves the United States, Israel, and Iran. To understand why this matters, we need to look at the scale of the Kenyan diaspora in the Gulf region. Official figures from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, last updated in December 2025, show a substantial population. In the United Arab Emirates alone, there are an estimated 40,000 Kenyan citizens. In Qatar, another 15,000. In Saudi Arabia, a massive 100,000. And in the broader Middle East, including countries like Oman and Bahrain, perhaps another 25,000. That's a total of roughly 180,000 Kenyans whose lives and livelihoods are now directly impacted by regional instability. The initial KQ flights, while crucial, represent just the first wave of what could become a massive logistical and diplomatic operation. Let's visualize that diaspora. We're looking at a bar chart showing the estimated Kenyan population in key Gulf nations. On screen now, you see Saudi Arabia at the top with 100,000. The UAE follows with 40,000. Qatar with 15,000 and the broader region with 25,000. That's a significant community, and their safety is now a top priority for the government in Nairobi. This crisis didn't emerge in a vacuum. The timeline is critical. The conflict escalated dramatically in late February 2026, drawing in major global powers. On February 28th, the United Kingdom, under Prime Minister Keir Starmer, announced it was deploying 4 additional Typhoon fighter jets to its base in Qatar. This move, explicitly stated as strengthening defensive operations, signaled a hardening of Western military posture. Then, on March 1st, the first reports of disrupted shipping lanes in the Strait of Hormuz emerged. By March 3rd, the National Security Advisory Committee in Kenya, chaired by President William Ruto, held an emergency session. Their primary concern? The safety of Kenyan nationals and the security of Kenya's energy supply. This brings us to the second, and perhaps more insidious, threat, the economy. Over 70% of Kenya's petroleum imports traditionally transit through the Gulf region. A war there doesn't just threaten people. It threatens the very fuel that powers our industries, our transport, and our homes. The Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, EPRA, has been thrust into the spotlight. Its Director General, Daniel Kiptoo, made a crucial statement this week. He said that despite the conflict, the state-owned entities contracted under Kenya's government-to-government fuel import deal have provided assurances. They claim shipments for the next 2 monthly pricing cycles, covering March and April, will be honored. But what does that assurance really mean in a war zone? Let's examine the numbers. Kenya's average monthly fuel import bill is approximately 50 billion shillings. A disruption lasting just 1 month could force the country to tap its strategic petroleum reserve, which currently holds a 90-day supply. However, that reserve is costly to maintain and deplete. EPRA's confidence is based on contracts, but contracts can be voided by acts of war. The financial risk is enormous. If supply chains are severed, the cost of alternative shipping routes or spot market purchases could add between 10 to 20 billion shillings to the national monthly import bill. That's a cost that would inevitably be passed on to consumers. Now, let's contrast that with the human cost of the repatriation effort. Organizing these flights is a monumental task involving multiple government agencies. The lead is the National Disaster Operations Center, the NDOC. They are coordinating with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Directorate of Immigration Services, and of course, Kenya Airways. For the initial flights on March 4th and 5th, the operation mobilized approximately 120 personnel across all agencies. This includes consular officers, immigration officials, medical staff from the Ministry of Health and Security details. Each repatriation flight, using a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, has a capacity for 234 passengers. The cost of operating such a special flight, according to aviation analysts, is about 25 million shillings one way. Who bears that cost? It's a mix. The government is subsidizing a portion for citizens, while residents and other nationals are likely paying commercial or near commercial rates. We have a stat card on screen now highlighting the scale of the initial airlift. The number, 468. That's the total passenger capacity for the two confirmed repatriation flights operated by Kenya Airways on March 4th and 5th. That's 468 people given a pathway home, against a backdrop of a diaspora numbering in the hundreds of thousands. The debate within government circles is intense. We are hearing multiple perspectives. On one side, the humanitarian and diplomatic imperative is clear. We cannot abandon our citizens, a senior official at Foreign Affairs told us on background. Every Kenyan abroad is our responsibility, especially in a conflict zone. The reputational cost of inaction is far greater than the financial cost of these flights. This group is pushing for a more expansive repatriation program, potentially involving charter flights and naval assets from allied nations. On the other side, the fiscal hawks within the Treasury are sounding alarms. A source within the Exchequer questioned, "Can we afford to become the evacuation airline for the region? We have a budget deficit to manage." Every shilling spent on emergency airlifts is a shilling not spent on healthcare, education, or infrastructure here at home. They argue for a more measured approach, encouraging citizens to shelter in place or seek commercial options where possible, with government assistance limited to the most vulnerable cases. Then there's the security perspective. The National Intelligence Service is reportedly tracking potential spillover effects. Could the conflict radicalize elements within the region? Could it lead to targeted attacks against foreign workers, including Kenyans? Their assessment will heavily influence the scale and speed of the evacuation. President Ruto, who has cultivated a strong relationship with U.S. President Donald Trump, is walking a diplomatic tightrope. Publicly, Kenya has called for an immediate ceasefire and peaceful dialogue. Privately, it is leveraging every diplomatic channel to secure safe passage for its citizens and guaranteed fuel shipments. Let's look at a comparison on screen. We're comparing two key metrics, the immediate humanitarian cost versus the long-term economic risk. On the left, the estimated cost of evacuating 5,000 citizens via special flights, approximately 500 million shillings. On the right, the potential monthly economic impact of a sustained 20% increase in fuel prices, a staggering 30 billion shillings in added costs to the economy. This stark contrast explains the government's dilemma. The regional context is also vital. Kenya is not acting in isolation. Uganda has already begun evacuations. On March 5, 2026, a flight carrying Ugandan students from Iran, via Turkey, landed at Entebbe International Airport. Tanzania and Rwanda are assessing their options. This collective action by East African nations underscores the severity of the situation. However, it also creates competition for limited resources, airport slots, aircraft, and safe air corridors. Kenya's advantage is its national carrier and its relatively robust diplomatic network in the Gulf. What happens next? The contingency plans, as we understand them, are multi-tiered. Phase 1, which we are in now, involves scheduled repatriation flights on commercial aircraft like the recent KQ operations. Phase 2, which would be triggered by a further escalation, involves seeking assistance from international partners for mass evacuations, possibly using military transport aircraft. Phase 3, the worst-case scenario, involves the activation of the National Security Council and potentially the deployment of Kenya Defense Forces assets to assist in a regional evacuation effort, though this is considered a last resort. For the average Kenyan, the questions are more immediate. Will fuel prices spike next month? EPRA's Daniel Kipto says no for the next 2 cycles, but analysts are skeptical. The global oil benchmark, Brent crude, has already jumped 15% since the conflict widened. That inflationary pressure takes time to hit the pump, but it is coming. Secondly, for families with relatives in the Gulf, the anxiety is palpable. The government has set up a 24-hour emergency hotline that has already received over 2,500 calls in the past 72 hours. The demand for clear information and guaranteed seats on flights is overwhelming. We have a final timeline graphic on screen now, mapping the key events. It starts with conflict escalation on February 28th, then UK jet deployment on March 1st, the Kenyan NSC meeting on March 3rd. The first KQ repatriation flights on March 4th and 5th, and today, March 6th, where the planning for potential Phase 2 operations is underway. In conclusion, Kenya finds itself navigating a perfect storm of humanitarian duty and economic peril. The repatriation flights by Kenya Airways are a visible and commendable first response, a symbol of the state's responsibility to its citizens. But they are just the tip of the spear. The real challenge lies beneath the surface, securing the energy lifeline in a war zone, managing the colossal financial risks, and preparing for a crisis that could last weeks or months. The decisions made in the coming days by President Ruto's administration will test its crisis management capabilities like never before. The world is watching how Kenya responds. More importantly, 180,000 Kenyans in the Gulf are waiting. This is a developing story, and we will continue to bring you updates. For now, the message is clear: the crisis in the Middle East is no longer a distant headline. It has landed, quite literally, at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. Subscribe to Kenya News Update today for continuing coverage. Thank you for watching.